Yeah, so this is a very timely event. So the member states are currently preparing their national restoration plans, amongst others, with the aim of reversing the decline of pollinators. So I hope with this seminar we can contribute to this process. So thanks very much for organizing it. I have the next slide, please. So there's a lot to tell you. So my aim is actually to tell you a little bit what the Commission is doing in relation to pollinators. But I've been asked to keep it short, so I will just scratch the surface. But you can later have the presentation. It's full of links, and you can look at the various documents that I refer to. But let me start with the Nature Restoration Regulation. It establishes a legally binding target to reverse the decline of pollinators. The member states have to monitor pollinator populations. So the Commission is currently working on a delegated act to set out precise methodology which should be science-based. It should be annual monitoring. It should give a representative picture of what is the situation in terms of pollinator trends in member states. So, but of course, with monitoring, it is not enough. So the member states also have to install restoration measures. So the two have to go together, so you have to do the right thing, and then you also have to be able to talk about it and monitor it. So these restoration measures are currently being put together. Just early in March, the common reporting format has been agreed, and then that have to be submitted in September next year in a draft form, and will have to be revised in a year. Can I have the next? It's already done. This restoration regulation now reinforces the EU Pollinator Initiative that has been up and running since 2018. So the Commission has started this initiative in order to reverse the decline of pollinators. It's a non-binding legal framework, has been revised in 2023, and has basically three objectives: to improve the knowledge, understand what's going on in terms of pollinator trends, the drivers, but also the way how to mitigation measures. Then, of course, tackle the cause of decline, action on the ground, and reach out to society, engage into strategic planning. I've seen that some people have taken photos. The presentation will be distributed, and you can certainly have it. Can I have the next slide? So, starting with the knowledge dimension, Emily has already mentioned it. We are now starting to train people in the identification of pollinators, because much of this knowledge has been lost. So these EPIC projects are supported by 3 million euros to train people to identify the main pollinator groups and enable them to undertake the monitoring. And then we also have a whole range of Horizon projects, and only a few are listed here. For instance, Not Safeguard, which is organizing this event here, but also some others. This is just basically a selected list. And these Horizon projects, they are looking, for instance, at the competition between wild and managed pollinators. They're looking at the dependency of society on pollinators. We have two representatives here. We'll talk about that later today. Pesticide risk assessment will be improved, and of course, how to best restore pollinator populations in agriculture. We also have a forthcoming project on pollination in soil. Can I have the next slide, please? Also outside the Horizon Europe project, we are supporting knowledge generation. I was already mentioning the forthcoming delegated act on monitoring technology. This has been prepared over many years by the STING project, and under this link you can see the reports that have emerged from this activity in terms of how pollinators can best be monitored. We also have monitoring activities other than just on the pollinators themselves. We are also looking at monitoring of drivers of pollinator decline, environment, looking at habitat quality. Insignia is looking at pesticide pressure using bees and sentinels to collect pesticides out of the field, bring them back into the hive where they can be quantified. And you will also see here a link to the latest addition to the red lists, European red lists of to the second dimension, tackle pollinator decline. The Commission is supporting or has supported the development of concrete action plans for some pollinator groups that are exposed to particular pressures. And more widely, we are supporting the PolHub project, which is aimed to convince the member states to include pollinators into the group of species, typical species, for habitats that are protected under the Habitat Directive. So at the moment, there are very few insects that are used for the assessment of the conservation status of protected habitats. So this will, so we hope that member states will take on the results from this project and include pollinators as well. We have various activities in relation to pesticides. Here's one live project, the Horizon project, supporting the member states in the development of binding integrated pest management measures. And let me just mention then the last link. Of course, we also have to reach out to farming communities. So we have supported last year a workshop on pollinator-friendly farm. Of course, the main action on the ground will come from measures supported by the member states within their restoration plans. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. Of course, the Commission is in constant contact with the member states and the various stakeholder groups. So we have a working group on pollinators. It is a subgroup of the EU biodiversity platform. This platform is supporting the Commission in the implementation of the EU biodiversity strategy. So this platform is working on pollinators. It's meeting several times a year. So we are in regular exchange with the member states and also with stakeholder groups to discuss issues on pollinators. There are also there's also international activity. The FAO is organizing a global platform on pollinators, and the Commission is also supporting this activity. A very recent initiative is the youth pollinators, supported generously by the European Parliament with a budget of 5 million euros. So this activity is composed of 3 elements. So first of all, there is the youth citizen assembly. So we are inviting 100 young people to come together to also discuss pollinators, develop a grassroots movement, express their views, and what could best be done. We are reaching out to schools in the Basel School project, and there is 1 million euros available for small grants to support young people in the development of ideas what could be done on pollinators. We really believe that it is very important to invest into young people in order to get a lasting effect on policy development. So this is this was my last slide. You see, it was not a comprehensive overview, but you see that the pollinator support requires many different activities, and of course today we are also contributing to this process. So I wish us all a very productive summer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andreas. You will have an opportunity to ask him questions later today. What I would like to do now is bring up our first 2 safeguard researchers. I would like to introduce Tom Breeze, Senior Researcher at the University of Reading. Tom is both an ecologist and an economist of pollination services, not something you come across every day. He's contributed to many pollinator initiatives and research, and that includes the EU pollinator scheme and the UK one, which came first, and the IPBES pollinator assessment. His colleague, Georgios Klefolimos, is Associate Professor in Environmental and Agricultural Economics in Montpellier, and he specialises in the economic valuation of pollination services and agri-environmental policy. He's a lead expert for the French National Agency for Food and Environmental Safety, ANSES, so he advises them on pollinators and pollination. And he also has many projects on his agenda, on his to-do list. Over to you.
Thanks, Evelyn. Right, so we decided rather than doing a presentation each to do a bit of a double act. So I'm going to cover the first few slides and then I'm going to pass over to Yorgos to cover the with this talk, this is less about major results from Safeguard and more about sort of where the thinking from Safeguard has led us and where we'd like to go in the future. And it's very much about sort of taking what we know about the value of pollinators a lot further. So, this is not the order. I think slides have got mixed up because this is the middle of the presentation. Anyway, so, okay, so there's very much gone off script. Apologies for this. There's, yeah, so. We know there's an awful lot of different methods to manage pollinators, and Andre will be talking about some of the specific findings of the Safeguard project later on. But some of our major findings are that alternative farming systems, such as agroforestry, mixed intercropping, etc., can provide significant boosts to pollinator populations and pollination services in the short and long term. There's also a range of targeted habitat interventions where we're looking at actually adding specific plants or specific pollinators in specific landscapes and just generally protected areas. And protected areas doesn't necessarily have to be nature reserves. Several studies finding that actually urban areas can be just as good for pollinators, but with a bit of a caveat that you tend to get the same species. The EU has already supported several policies that can support pollinators, including agro-environment schemes or eco schemes. Habitat protections is just a map of Central Europe of some of the Natura 2000 sites I clicked out, and various bee health programs as well. So there's been a lot of effort has been put into the preservation of pollinators. And yeah, this is not the right version of this talk at all. Sorry about this, folks. There is definitely stuff missing here. There's a lot of costs associated with this management, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, from the direct costs of actually putting things in, to opportunity costs because you are asking farmers to give up land to plant wildflowers, maintain hedgerows, and take other actions to preserve pollinators, as well as the transactional costs of if you want to move to a more transformative system like agroforestry. It has a long lead-in time, and it can take a very long time to start to yield results. This is a challenge because we are well aware that farming is under an awful lot of pressure, downward pressure in particular. So if farmers don't benefit from pollinators, and many of them don't, if they're growing cereals, if they're producing livestock, then there's very little monetary incentive for them to do this. And also, a lot of crops only benefit to a modest extent. What we're seeing in the UK and in some of Yorgos's work is that actually areas with high inputs still have high yields, even if they're projected to have low pollinators. There's a range of other factors around this, and there's a slide unfortunately seems to be missing, which we outline there are pollination deficits. So just because they're getting higher yields than areas with higher pollinator populations doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually getting the best yields they could be getting, or the most stable. And it may take many years to see a return on investment. There's a classic study from the US which showed it, depending on the price of blueberries, which is already a high price crop, you're talking between 5 and 10 years to get a proper return on the investment there. And these things need to be accountable. They need to be, landowners need proper support around that. There is some potential. Some work we did do in Safeguard is this work on the co-benefits of pollinator management, in that they can provide multiple other ecosystem services. And a lot of farmers that we've spoken to, particularly in a former European project, FP7 Liberation, a lot of these ecosystem services like soil erosion, weed control, water regulation. These actually matter to most farmers more than pollinators do. So hopefully in the future we're intending to explore these co-benefits in more depth, and Andrew might speak a little bit about that. So, yes, great. It's, they've been doing excellent work quite a while on this. Okay. On to okay, no, it's gotten scrambled.
It's a correct version.
Yeah, no, this is the start of the presentation.
You want to speak at the decline as more experts? And
Yeah, okay.
catch up through the, and then to catch up through the value chains.
All right, yes. Sorry about that. Sorry about those folks. This was not in the script. So yeah, we're talking about pollinators. Who are pollinators? Well, bees and hoverflies. This is actually one I took on campus. The University of Reading has a great campus. So it's a hornet mimic hoverfly, Polycells aria, and bumblebee. But also around Europe we have some butterfly pollinators, some very small insects, including thrips. These are actually major pollinators of cocoa in Eastern Africa. But we also have bats. We have hummingbirds as pollinators, even Europe. And some of the work we're doing in the Bauer project is actually in the Canary Islands. Hummingbirds are quite significant pollinators over there. And I love this image because it shows the real diversity of bees in Europe, with the euro for reference. So from a tiny lazy blossom all the way up to this huge silent hummingbird, which is an absolutely gorgeous species. But we know, as Evelyn mentioned, that bee and hoverfly species have declined across Europe and North America. This is a study from the UK, which shows basically the diversity of bumblebees and hoverflies has declined on average on a per square basis across the UK since 1980. This is only based on very limited available data we have, but the UK has a longer history of data collection than a lot of countries, so we're very fortunate in that regard. And we've all heard about this, there's a lot of evidence, things like language change, agrochemical use, and climate change are the main drivers of these declines, but also a lower diversity of species, not just about the abundance, but lower diversity will increase the risks of shocks to pollination services. And yeah, these are, okay, this is actually the proper version of the presentation. Yeah, so a whole different range of species are important for pollinating different crops at different times of year and across different scales. And to make matters worse, beekeepers, and who should not be forgotten in this conversation, are also facing growing pressures from disease, particularly the spread of new diseases due to climate change, and the rising costs of managing those diseases, as medicines and just the raw materials they need are getting much more expensive, whilst prices for honey aren't necessarily rising. So in terms of crop pollination, we've heard an awful lot about how important pollination is, but it's around 3/4 of the world's crops benefit to some extent from pollination. These are actually strawberries that I found. So one left is an improperly pollinated strawberry that shouldn't have been included, but I love that it was because it's a great example of why proper pollination is important. That is not marketable quality, and that would not pass grade normally. So it's really important for that quality aspect. It's not important for cereal crops, but it is very important for a lot of the high-value horticulture, spice, and stimulant crops, particularly. You probably drank some of it this morning in the form of coffee. And the actual level of pollination services is affected by behaviour, the abundance, and the diversity of pollinator species. So it's not just a matter of having more, you need a higher diversity of them, and they need to be the right species that behave in the right ways. Tomato is an example of this. I didn't have a picture of a tomato being pollinated, but they need bumblebees to pollinate them because they vibrate the flower. And having a diversity of pollinators is also important for building resilience to pollinator losses. So if you are growing crops in a rotation, you will need different pollinators for different crops in that rotation. And also, one of the opportunities of climate change is it does allow us to grow crops in places we haven't previously been able to, and they might require pollinators in areas which we haven't traditionally thought about that. So having good diversity is important in that case. But also for protecting against the short-term shocks, bad years, extreme weather, etc., or the longer-term impacts of climate change that just force species out of their traditional ranges. So pollination deficits, is this really a problem? Well, the last global study estimates around 4.7% of global crop production is currently being lost due to inadequate pollination. And in European apple orchards, we've widely observed a whole range of deficits, ranging from 9% in Germany all the way up to 26% pollination deficit in the Netherlands. And a lot of EU countries are now starting to create markets for pollination services, or searching for some sort of mechanical replacement. I was actually involved in this bottom example in the Gobi Desert in China, where there are a lot of small, high sustainability solar-powered greenhouses producing tomatoes, but they have a problem of they can't actually get boxes of bumblebees in because they can't buy them in any less than 100 at a time, and they're only very small pollens, so they don't actually need that many. So they're trying to breed a new line. We've heard a lot about how important and valuable pollinators are. There's global assessment puts the total value at between $235 and $577 billion a year. This map is very out of date, I should stress. This is from the assessment, which is nearly 10 years old. And the area of pollinator-dependent crops has grown by more than 70% since 1961. It's actually grown by about 10% since this map. So, and although we could rely on managed pollinators, this study, also coming out of China, demonstrates quite nicely that we don't have we do not have adequate global stocks of honeybees to provide pollination services alone. And even within Europe, where it could theoretically create a big cross-national market, there are issues with barriers. Slovenia has a very large beekeeper population. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can easily arrange a contract with them to provide pollination services in Germany. And these represent added value to primary agricultural production. This is really what we want to talk about with this session. And in particular, we've tried through Safeguard and other projects to take it a little bit beyond the farm level. And this is a study I was part of, where we looked at the value of pollinators in trade. Currently, we import over 200 million euros worth of raw pollinated crops annually. That is just raw crops, not processed. And they range from cocoa, the bottom one is actually coffee, tomatoes, but also rapeseed, soy, sunflowers. We import huge quantities of these things. Pollinator losses can, in theory, result in an increase in price and damage produced profits. And that can have an impact on the availability and affordability of nutritious food. And actually, the places that are theoretically worst hit by this are also places which already have issues with vitamin deficiency. So what we did in this study is we knocked out pollinators in the EU and then used a very basic trade model to just look at what would be the impact around the world. And as you can see, in knocking out pollinators in the EU, it's beneficial for the price of produce in Brazil, in the US, and Canada, but it actually causes big economic losses in India, in Japan, in Russia, in China. We also, in this study though, so that part isn't published, that's part of a Safeguard effort. What is published was this, where we knocked out pollinators in heavily indebted poor countries. So these are countries that are classed by the World Bank as heavily indebted poor countries. They're subject to quite significant levels of debt relief. There is some debate that some of these countries should probably not be on that list anymore, particularly Ghana. But we knocked out pollinators in just those countries. We just assumed pollination loss in those and everyone else is fine. And the impacts, as you can see, are not primarily in those countries. Those countries do in some cases suffer losses, the Côte d'Ivoire in particular, but actually the biggest losses are in Europe, in China, in the US. Because we have a globalized trade market, focusing on pollination, pollinator conservation, just within our own borders, is not going to protect us from the impacts of pollinator losses. And where we are going with this work, and I will actually hand over to you after this, is looking at pollinators in the wider value chain. So we purchase crops, as I say, we import a lot of raw crops, but a lot of the real value isn't from agriculture. Agriculture accounts for 1.8% of the EU GDP, which is a very different system. And we transform crops into all sorts of things, from drinks to drinking cocoa and chocolate, to paste, to even things like yogurts, of which this is coming from livestock, which are in turn fed on pollinator-dependent crops. And the value of pollination along those chains generally increases the further up you go, because it's in the later stages that the value is truly added, particularly when you think about industries beyond food. Fashion, cotton is a pollinator-dependent crop, and it will have a 25 to 30% yield loss with inadequate pollination. So a lot of the fashion industry is also dependent on pollinators, biofuel, and even the secondary industries that arise from the products of pollinator-dependent crops. Coffee houses all over Europe employ tens of thousands of people. And if there were a significant loss of pollinators, particularly in places like Indonesia, with a price shock, how many people in Europe are going to lose their jobs because people can't afford to go to coffee shops anymore? So the risks that these actors face from pollinator losses currently are not widely considered in decision making. And different actors, in turn, are going to put different pressures on pollinators. We know that farming can put direct pressures on pollinators, but what's often not discussed are the indirect pressures that actors further up the chain can place on pollinators because of an increase in demand for particular crops, or particular crops at certain prices, and that can encourage a lot of the pressures which are on pollinators. So now I'm actually going to hand over to Yorgos.
Thank you very much. So, exactly as Tom said, in order to estimate the cascading effects of pollinators collapse, we have to study the different value chains that these products are entering and what outputs are giving. So this is quite a new field that we have started working recently, and the projects that Butterfly, Valor, and the other projects are going to investigate more. But here is an example that we are working currently in Occitanie region in the south of France, where we try to analyze and to estimate the value chain of pollination and to see the different value chains that are entering and the different values that they are providing. So we have the apicultural sector with so many different products that they are contributing, from pharmaceutical to pastry shops to candy shops to literally many different value chains. We have the pollination services that are pollinating a series of crops with different values in high surfaces. So it's a little bit difficult to see, but it was a little bit difficult also to integrate this because there are so many different value chains. Just if we take an example, the majority of the honey produced in the region are sold directly to the consumers, but we have also the sunflower honey that is selling to the bakery shops in order to produce the pastries. So this gives an added value of almost 11 euros per kilo in the already existing value that the pastry shops are buying from the beekeepers. So we have seen that only in one channel we almost double the price of the product. Similarly, if we are speaking pollination services, we can see that for the production, for example, of vegetables, we have prices that are between 43 to 50 euros per hive, because here we are in a situation where there is a pollination services market. If we go then to the production of wild flora, you know that in south of France we have a lot of wild plants that are serving for pharmaceutical and other businesses, so a collapse of the pollination services will conclude the collapse of the wild flora and a cascading effect in the pharmaceutical industry. So all this, and this we are speaking about a small scale, but still, due to the difficulty to collect data, it takes a lot of time. But this is a goal that we have in the future project, to expand at national and European level in order to investigate more the cascading effects. So this is a slide that Tom explained well. I mean, the pollinator management can be in different systems. I will pass this and I will go to the policies. Tom explained very well that we have different kinds of programs to protect pollinators coming from the second pillar or from other initiatives. But however, through the first pillar of CAP, for the first time we have the eco schemes. The countries are free to create their own eco schemes. And we have some countries that they have created eco schemes in order to protect wild pollinators. For example, in France there is an eco scheme that provides almost 50 euros per hectare in order to dedicate at least 4% of the land in pollinator-friendly practices. So an extra tool for the farmers to protect even more the pollinators. As Tom said, I mean, the problem is that implementing these measures has a lot of costs. The cost can be separated in different, like transaction costs or opportunity costs, while the benefits may not be directly seen by the farmers. Here I have to add that in many countries, especially, I mean, we are speaking about the EU, different countries, different institutional aspects, so we are facing a lot of socio-cultural issues, not apart from transactional or opportunity cost. We have socio-cultural issues for the adoption of these kind of measures. For example, in France or in Italy, we have seen that these measures require a change in the working plan of the farmers, and the farmers are very resistant in order to change their working plans, even if no supplementary costs are arriving. But for example, if we force them to spray or to take or to use the pesticide during night, this is a heavy risk for them. So we have always to consider the risk aversion of in the different contexts within the countries and within the same country. Here are the several co-benefits. I will pass to go directly to the regulations. So we have Andreas presented the nature restoration regulation and the monitoring schemes that are implementing. We have the pollination initiative that has been reinforced. The previous scheme had some problems regarding the adoption of the practices. For example, maybe Tom has also, because to my knowledge only France and UK implemented the first round of the pollinator initiative. In France we had the problem that this initiative was launched together with the national plan for the pesticide use. You have seen the last year what is happening in France, strikes against the pesticide use. So even if they took some measures through the pollination initiative, it didn't give much of results because the use of pesticides, instead of decrease, increased the last 5 years. So, I mean, again, we are coming to that we have always, apart from the cost and the benefits, we have always to consider the special socio-economic and socio-cultural aspects that has every country in order to convince and to integrate farmers and other stakeholders in the decision-making process. So, we have several initiatives, as we said, that where companies, value chains or stakeholders, they can address in order to have aid and investments for the nature. From the common agricultural policy, initiatives like the pollination initiative, both from the and now from the common agricultural policy, both from first pillar and second pillar. So we have many different projects that are running now in order to address different issues. So we have projects that are trying to make better cost-benefit analysis by integrating the value chains and estimating the cascading effects. We have projects that are trying to identify the potential barriers and opportunities in order to motivate the stakeholders to adopt and to start using restoration practices. We are trying to create new business models by integrating all these benefits and costs in order, at the farm level, with new business models, especially in Valor, for example, and butterfly projects are going to develop business models at the farm level, but also in industry and in other stakeholders of the value chain in order to adopt restoration measures and also to find new market channels in order to distribute their products. And also consumer behavior studies are taking place, eco labs are creating and testing in order to motivate consumers to buy products that they have been produced by protecting pollinators. So, as you can see, through RESTPOL, Valor, AgriPol, and Butterfly, this is just 4 projects that are running at the same time. We are trying to capture the whole value chain from the producer to the consumer in order to raise all the barriers and find new opportunities for the adoption of restoration practices and the protection of pollinators. And here is some questions that it's mostly for you, and we can of course discuss how we can capture the value of pollinators in a way that is useful to food business and to other value chain actors. How we can use this type of economic valuation to build links between the owners and the other value chain actors. What can public institutions do to better communicate and mainstream these values to the stakeholders? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom and Georgios, despite the difficulties. That was really fascinating. Well done. And they've done such a good job with the timekeeping. We have a bit of time if anyone has any questions on what they've just told you. No questions right now, yes?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a very nice second presentation. Yes, is it working? Yeah? All right. Thank you, Tom and Georgia, for a very nice second presentation. It was really wonderful with all the pictures. I was wondering, there was, maybe it's too detailed, but I saw somewhere saying that there was a 200 million import of pollinator-depending high-end products in the EU, and I was thinking like, 200 million, that is virtually nothing in the EU.
So it's just raw, to add that, it's just raw product, and also those figures are several years old. Date Act. However, the FAO has updated its database and has added an awful lot more categories since we did that. So it was a little bit nightmarish trying to get that done on the Eurostar over here. So it is almost certainly higher than that. But as I say, that is just raw product. So that's not including cake from oilseed. It's not including roasted coffee. It's not including juices or anything like that. So that is just raw, fresh produce.
Yeah, so that is non-roasted coffee or non-roasted cacao, things like that.
Yeah.
But still, I think on the European market, 200 million is.
Well, that's net as well. So some countries are importing more than that, and some countries. So Spain's net export for pollinated crops, for instance. So its total pollinated imports are negative. So that's that. Yeah, probably should add that as well.
Right. Thank you.
I'm one of the guys in the House of European History. We were speaking about France and United Kingdom on an equal footing. is the United Kingdom involved in these programs as member states of the European Union are?
In terms of the research projects, yes, we are. We were able to rejoin Horizon last year, thank goodness. So I'm actually coordinating the Valor project. So yeah, the UK is very much involved in all of these, and the British government is still, despite its turbulence, let's be politically correct here, it's still very engaged on pollinator-related issues. They're still very popular with the British public. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. You will have a chance to ask these two questions again when we open questions for them after the panel discussions. Sorry to cut you off. What I would like to do now is I would like to introduce our panel. And as I introduce you, I'd like you to come up and grab one of these microphones, take a seat. And then I will launch the panel discussion. We'll have a round from the panelists, and then we will be able to pose more questions. And that will include questions to you. So, please take a seat. To that point. Okay, so we have a great first panel. I will start with Athanasios, ask you to come up. He is a sustainability strategist with expertise in biodiversity, regenerative agriculture and supply chain resilience. And his consultancy De La Tierra supports farming communities through trade and technology. And he's here today, amongst other reasons, because he works closely with a company called Innocent Drinks. And I'm not sure if you've all had an Innocent drink, but they're really fruit-rich smoothies, and they're really grown big in the market. Then we have Frank Bogovic, and he, until recently, worked hard as an MEP. He's very familiar with the European Landowners Organisation until last summer. But, very interestingly, he also produces apples, is that right? And do you also keep bees?
Myself.
Right, in the family. We also have Andreas Ziama, and he is here from the Lake Constance Foundation, which is a not-for-profit based in southern Germany. And they have a lot of very interesting initiatives with farmers, including one called Pollinator Ambassadors. We'll hear more from Andreas himself. And lastly, we have Casey Woodward, and he set up a company called AgriSound. And as you can guess, this is tech and AI, and they do interesting things to monitor pollinators. So while the panel gets settled, I will go back to our topic. And as you heard from Tom and Georgios, we can put economic numbers on our pollination service. But I want to point out here that they also do research on all the other values that people associate with pollinators. And one of the amazing things about pollinators in Europe now, well, all over the world, is that many people care about them. Many people understand the pollination that they do, and they put values on this. But these values are multifaceted. There are many different ways in which we value pollinators, and also the ways in which we think we can help them. Now, farmers are as multifaceted as we all are, but at the same time, and have many motivations to protect pollinators, but at the same time they are running a business and they have to do this under the economic constraints of farming. And as we heard, we're all very aware of the pressures that farmers are under. It's very much part of the discourse here in Brussels. And just to mention two things that are happening right now. The Commission has put forward a proposal to change the Common Market Organisation regulations so that farmers can negotiate contracts in a more advantageous way in the value chain, and also to change the Unfair Trading Practices Directive to make cross-border contracts and values fairer for farmers. And this includes, for example, a better legal situation for farmers to set up sustainability initiatives and contracts with buyers that put in sustainability criteria for better price. And lastly, the recently launched Agri-Food Observatory of the Commission is actively now developing methods and indicators to measure costs across the value chain. So these are all things in which pollinator and pollination services play a big role. So, I'll kick off the panel now. Kick off the panel now with Athanasios. Tell us what's the value of pollinators in the innocent drinks business, and what have you done to help?
Thanks, Evelyn. In terms of innocence, 86% of ingredients rely directly or indirectly on pollinators. So as a business, innocence is upward reliant in terms of pollinator services. So it's of high material importance. And in terms of the products it makes, juices and smoothies, there's nowhere to hide. So whenever there are climatic shocks resulting in loss of yield, that directly impacts the price. So as a business, highly sensitive to price fluctuations caused by climatic and other shocks to food production, not only in Europe but around the world.
And turning to Frank, you see this from both a view from policy and from being a producer. What are your main takes on this issue, and what do you think needs to be changed?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. As you said, I'm apple producer since 1986. Later I came in politics, and now after all these years, I try to look on all these topics we speak here, or we spoke in the European Parliament in the next 10 years, from this practical way. How to introduce this, what we speak about, measures which we make in real life. Because sometimes I think things are disconnected, and it's not easy to farmers to understand this. I'm both roles, I really try to work in this way. And if I can say, I started to bring beehives in my orchards in the end 80s. There was one friend of mine. Each springtime we brought these beehives because I knew very well what it means for my apples. If I bring, I don't know, at the time I had 5 hectares, and we brought around 10 beehives, and it was very good for quality, especially not only quantity for my apples. Later, when I was in local politics, and I was also Minister for Agriculture in Slovenia, and now I'm here, I see this transformation of agriculture sector. I know very well what we farmers use to spray, which pesticides, insecticides. It's in the 90s, in 2000, and in Slovenia, in my country, we started with integrated pest management before we entered the European Union, and we had the schemes, and around about this scheme was also the entrance to the market, and everybody knew if you are in this scheme, you respect some rules. And I think that this is connected with this CAP rules, where you have conditionality and also additional things. And I think that we really raised the level, what we are doing in the orchards now, what's allowed in the past. And these rules are changed each year, and this is transformation of sector. For Slovenia, I can say the most important role in these topics about pollinators, the most important role are beekeepers associations, Slovenian Beekeeper Association. Because in Slovenia we are 2 million population, and we have 11,000 beekeepers. It's the biggest density of beekeepers. And these are usually small. Few of them in Slovenia are 100 plus hives. Most of them between, I don't know, 5, 20, 25 hives. And you have in each village, few of them. And I think that they made a lot of action. For example, one was honey breakfast. It was, I was part of this action also. When I was minister, we transformed this in breakfast of local products. Honey, apple, milk, bread. And there are 1 week action in the primary school, kindergartens. last year it was close to 300,000 pupils who was very involved in this. And through this, I think that we did what was also in this action plan to learn to teach population more importantly. And the biggest mistake which can farmer do in Slovenia is if you harm this. And since 2011 we had no murder of this in Slovenia. And I think that in this way, through this practical way, and what is good for farmers, what is good for beekeepers, good for society, we can do a lot also for the wild pollinators and pollinators.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to Andreas. So there are many benefits that conservation of wild pollinators brings beyond pollinating crops. How can we support farmers to really invest in pollinator conservation and reward that?
Yeah, thank you for this question. In this, I want to emphasize that farmers, not just food producers, but also soil managers, climate managers, biodiversity managers, and yeah, therefore it's important to support them. One approach is to compensate them for their measures. In 2010, the Constance Foundation, together with beekeepers and local food distributing company and Rewe, which is one of the largest retailers in Germany, launched a project for the improvement or to protect wild bees especially and other pollinators. And it started with 10 farmers, which created flower stripes and which is for birds of prey and structures like hedges and trees and so on. And we were paid for the environmental advice for the farmers and also for the measures. So yeah, it's quite successful today. It's ongoing throughout Germany. There are 540 farmers throughout Germany, which are growing fruits and vegetables also. And yeah, I think 8.8 million square meters of flower stripe has been built as insect hotels is another very important topic. I want to highlight that also that it's not just about the blight and the honeybee, it's also about the wild bees and other pollinators, which are also an indicator for a healthy biodiversity and ecosystem. And also for the farmers, the wild bees are active in lower temperatures where the honeybees still squeezed in the hive.
Thank you very much. What does the Rewe supermarket, where do they see the benefits of this and how are they seeing it in their long-term strategy?
Well, one advantage is for sure an image. And also, as we heard before, it's yeah, good for the quantity and quality as well. Yeah.
So they recognise it also as decreasing the risk in their supply chains. They're doing it partly for the image and partly for also as a long-term risk.
So this project is formally called Planet. Due to green things directive, it's just a biodiversity project, but it's still ongoing. Sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, don't worry, we'll come back to it. It's just about the perspective of the supermarket and their long-term perspective. But let's turn to Casey now. So we have some interesting tech here. What role is that playing in trying to get better value along the food chain?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's so we've created a small product which I handy have one here, which is a smart listening device. So the idea that this is a small station that can be deployed in the field. It's powered by solar, and what it's doing is listening out for the wing beat frequencies of specific pollinator types, and can use that information to map out where there are pollinator deficits in the field, where there might be overabundance of pollinators as well. So we're using this information in a whole range of different ways. We work very closely with retailers, primarily in the UK, but also further afield as well. We deploy these into a range of different crop types, many of which are pollinator-dependent crops, and that is great because we're able to help the farmers to improve yield, but from a retailer perspective, we can also show quality improvements as well as shelf life extension as well, which is very common economic benefit from that perspective. But also clearly, we as consumers care about these, and certainly from a UK perspective, when we work with retailers and they survey consumers in stores, very commonly the decline of pollinators particularly is the number one sustainability issue they engage with the strongest. It's very visceral, and people understand much more than greenhouse gas emissions and carbon, which obviously equally are very important problems as well. So I think there is a very tangible brand benefit as well from being seen to be supportive of that. But beyond that as well, even for those farmers which are not producing crops which are dependent on pollinators, in that rotation, we know that there might be potatoes at the moment that could be all seed rate in the next rotation, and so therefore maintaining a healthy population of pollinators in that local area is important for long-term resilience, and that's what this device helps to show.
And how does the deal work for the farmers? Because they're investing then in improving the pollinator friendliness of their farming fields and getting the information from the device. How is that rewarded?
Yeah, so excellent question. So I think it's twofold. So I think in many cases our customer is the retailer or the processor. So they're the ones who are actually purchasing the devices. So the farmers or the producers actually have the benefit of having the device, hosting the device. But secondly, the data is also being used to drive further on-farm benefits, and particularly around access to things like green finance and green capital products. So we saw some of the slides earlier. There's a whole range of incentives that are coming onto the market to show that actually, if you can showcase that you are having positive impacts from a sustainability perspective beyond just carbon emissions, then that can be rewarded in terms of reducing interest rates on green orchard farms and things like that.
Right. And we heard from Tom that it takes maybe years of investment to restore the wild pollinator population, so they're really providing a